The camera flashes exploded like fireworks as the burgundy velvet envelope touched Robert's hands. He didn't even feel the weight of the golden trophy he held under his left arm. All his attention was on that unexpected object the presenter had handed him with an enigmatic smile. In the front row, Larissa applauded with exaggerated enthusiasm, her red dress too tight for the occasion, her neckline too plunging for any respectable ceremony. But Robert had never cared for such subtleties. At 52, he considered himself at the peak of his life, and Larissa, 20 years his junior, was the tangible confirmation of that success. The 24-carat gold seal gleamed under the lights of the Italian marble stage. Robert pulled the ribbon with the confidence of someone who had never faced an unpleasant surprise. The audience of executives, entrepreneurs, and investors from 40 countries watched via live broadcast. Dubai was the perfect setting for his consecration. 3 hotels built, 2 casinos in Las Vegas, a restaurant chain spreading across the American West Coast. Robert Davenport was, officially, the Entrepreneur of the Year. Inside the envelope, his hands found textured paper. When he unfolded the document, the real gold threads intertwined in the fiber caught the light like golden spiderwebs. The first words danced before his eyes, before his brain processed the meaning. Divorce petition. The ambient sound of the event hall seemed to recede, as if someone had turned down a volume knob. His eyes quickly scanned the following lines. 70% of all assets acquired during 26 years of marriage. 70% of hotels, investments, bank accounts. 70% of his life. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he found the photograph stapled to the document. The enlarged image showed him and Larissa in swimwear, intertwined in a net over crystal-clear waters. The Maldives, last February. The business trip Caroline had believed to be solitary. The private investigator had captured not just one moment, but dozens of them. The corner of the photo revealed more attached images: intimate dinners, intertwined hands, stolen kisses in hotel corridors. The giant screen behind him suddenly came to life with a flash. Robert turned slowly, still holding the papers, unable to process the speed at which his reality was crumbling. On the high-definition monitor, Caroline appeared via satellite. She was sitting in the home library, the one in Phoenix he had bought 7 years ago. The house she had meticulously decorated, choosing every light fixture, every Persian rug, every painting on the walls. Caroline wore a navy blue blazer set, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Her green eyes, the same eyes that had captivated him at a college party 3 decades ago, were serene, frighteningly serene. "Hello, Robert," her voice echoed through the hall sound system with crystal clarity. "Congratulations on the award. Truly, it's a remarkable achievement. 26 years building an empire. 26 years by your side, building every brick of that foundation while you cut ribbons at openings." The audience was paralyzed. Cameras from international broadcasters captured every second. Larissa rose from the front row, her face now pale under heavy makeup, her eyes wide, searching for an exit that wasn't there. Caroline continued, her voice firm and measured. "I could have sent these papers discreetly. My lawyers suggested it. But then I thought, Robert has always loved the spotlight. He always wanted to be seen, admired, celebrated. So why not give him a truly memorable moment?" A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "That young woman in red in the front row, does she know she's not the first? There was Amanda in San Francisco 3 years ago, Melissa in New York before her, and Claire. Claire was the first I found out about, almost 10 years ago. I always forgave. I always believed when you said you would change." Robert felt his legs weaken. The hand not holding the papers sought support on the acrylic podium. Around him, the murmuring began low and gradually grew louder. Executives whispered to each other. Smartphones were raised, capturing the moment for digital posterity. "But Larissa is special, isn't she?" Caroline tilted her head slightly. "You bought her an apartment in Manhattan. $350,000. From our money. From our joint account. My lawyer has all the documentation. Transfers, receipts, messages. 3 years of meticulously compiled evidence. Her voice carried no anger. That was the most disturbing part. There were no screams, hysterical accusations, or tears. Just facts presented with the precision of a financial audit. 70% is generous of me, considering I could ask for 80. Arizona laws considerably favor cheated spouses with substantial evidence. My lawyer, Gregory Morrison, he's sitting beside me now. The camera adjusted the frame, showing a man in a gray suit, gray-haired, professional expression. Gregory has won the 7 most complex divorce cases in the state in the last 5 years. He looks confident. Robert finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and unrecognizable. Caroline, please, can we talk in private? This doesn't have to. In private? She gently interrupted. Like the private conversations you had with Larissa while I thought you were in board meetings? Like the private weekends in Miami, Chicago, Seattle? No, Robert. I think we've had enough privacy. Now it's time for public clarity. Larissa began to move toward the side exit. A security guard, who had apparently received prior instructions, discreetly blocked her path. She was trapped there. Just like Robert, both unwilling protagonists of a humiliation choreographed with surgical precision. You will receive the official papers through the appropriate channels, Caroline continued. But I wanted you to have this moment, this instant of recognition, not of your business success, which is real and impressive, but of the cost of that success, of the choices you made, of the people you used as stepping stones. She leaned slightly toward the camera, her eyes seemingly piercing the distance between continents. For 26 years, I was your silent partner. I raised our children alone while you traveled. I managed our homes. I attended charity events, corporate dinners, openings. I smiled for photos. I pretended not to notice the strange perfume on your shirts. You built hotels, Robert. Places where people create memories. I wonder if you realize the irony of never truly being present in your own family's memories. The silence in the hall was absolute now. Even the photographers had stopped clicking, as if the moment were too sacred to be interrupted by mechanical noises. I have a meeting scheduled with my lawyer in 20 minutes. Caroline checked an invisible watch. But before I sign off, I want you to know something. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this for liberation. For 26 years, my identity has been tied to yours, Caroline Davenport, the mogul's wife. Now I'll just be Caroline Mitchell again. And I'll find out who that woman really is. She reached for something out of frame. Oh, and Robert? The children know. I talked to Madison and Christopher yesterday. They're disappointed, but they support my decision. Madison said it was about time. She's 23 and noticed things I pretended not to see. Christopher is more hurt, but understanding. They'll be with me during this process. The screen abruptly darkened, leaving Robert alone on stage with his golden trophy, divorce papers, and a photograph that condemned not just one extramarital affair, but a complete pattern of betrayal. The presenter remained frozen backstage, his script clearly not including contingencies for this kind of dramatic turn of events. The initial murmuring transformed into a cacophony of voices that reverberated through the acoustically paneled walls of the hall. Robert remained paralyzed at the center of the stage, the divorce papers still clutched between his fingers as if they were evidence of a crime he couldn't remember committing. The golden trophy slipped from under his arm and tumbled onto the marble with a metallic clang that cut through the air. No one moved to retrieve it. Of the 40 international delegations present, at least 30 cameras were now pointed directly at him. His eyes scanned the crowd of faces, some shocked, others displaying that morbid pleasure people feel when witnessing the downfall of someone powerful. In the third row, he identified Marcus Chen, his biggest competitor in resort construction, barely managing to suppress a smile. Beside him, Dmitry Volkov, the Russian investor who had tried to buy his casino chain for 6 consecutive years, watched with calculating interest. probably already estimating how much Robert's assets would be worth during a forced sale due to the divorce. Larissa finally managed to bypass the security guard, her high heels clicking hastily against the marble floor as she ran toward the emergency exit. Before she reached the double doors, a Bloomberg journalist blocked her path, microphone extended like a sword. Robert managed to hear fragments of the questions. Did you know he was married? And how long did the relationship last? Larissa pushed the reporter hard enough to make her stumble, then disappeared through the swinging doors. The presenter finally regained some professional composure. He approached the microphone with cautious steps, as if approaching a wounded and unpredictable animal. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short break. The ceremony will resume in 15 minutes. His voice carried the neutral tone of someone trained for crisis situations, though his eyes betrayed absolute panic. But no one stood up. Everyone remained in their seats, eyes fixed on Robert, waiting for some reaction, some statement, something that would make that moment even more memorable to recount at executive dinners for the next 10 years. Robert tried to take a step toward the side stairs of the stage. His legs responded a second late, as if his brain needed to relearn how to send signals to his limbs. He descended the steps, holding onto the glass handrail, each step an eternity under the gaze of hundreds of executives who, just 10 minutes ago, had given him a standing ovation. When he reached floor level, Amanda Reeves appeared out of nowhere. She had been his executive assistant for 12 years, an efficient woman in her 40s who managed his schedule with military precision. Her face was pale, her eyes avoiding his as she held a silver tablet. Mr. Davenport, we need to leave now. There's a side entrance that leads directly to the parking lot. Her voice was low, professional, but he detected something new there. Pity. She felt pity for him. My phone, Robert managed to say, his voice coming out rough. I need to call Caroline. Amanda hesitated, then handed him a smartphone. It wasn't his, he vaguely realized. Yours is being bombarded with press calls. This is a clean number. He dialed the number of the house in Phoenix with visibly trembling fingers. Each ring sounded like a condemnation. 3 rings. 4. 5. Then the answering machine, Caroline's voice recorded in happier times. You've reached the Davenport residence. Please leave your message. The beep sounded like a final verdict. Caroline, please, we can talk about this. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but 26 years can't just end like this. Call me, please. He hung up, already knowing she wouldn't call back. Amanda gently touched his elbow, guiding him through a side corridor covered with navy blue carpet. Service doors led to a loading area where a black limousine was parked, engine running. The driver opened the back door without making eye contact. Everyone already knew. The humiliation had been broadcast live. Inside the air-conditioned vehicle, Robert sank into the soft leather, finally alone, except for the silent driver separated by an opaque divider. Only then did he fully unfold the divorce papers, forcing himself to read every word instead of just scanning them in panic. Caroline had been meticulous, not only in documenting the infidelity, but in tracking every penny he had spent on Larissa, and apparently on several other women over the last decade. Dinners at 5-star restaurants charged to corporate cards, jewelry bought at stores on Rodeo Drive, weekends at Caribbean resorts supposedly for competitor property inspections. She had receipts, bank statements, hotel staff testimonies. There was also a detailed list of her contributions to the construction of the Davenport empire. When he was at construction sites in Las Vegas, Caroline managed the operations in Phoenix. When he cut ribbons at openings, she was backstage negotiating contracts with suppliers. The first 3 hotels were partially financed with money from her inheritance, a detail he had conveniently forgotten over the years. The borrowed phone began to vibrate. Unknown numbers lit up the screen repeatedly. Press. Everyone wanted his statement, his version of the facts, perhaps a repentant tear captured in a photo to make headlines. He turned the device off completely. The limousine navigated through Dubai traffic, passing skyscrapers that pierced the desert sky, Shopping malls the size of small cities, fountains that danced in elaborate choreographies. He had loved this city, its unapologetic ostentation, its open celebration of excess. Now it seemed a cruel parody of his own distorted values. When they finally arrived at the Burj Al Arab, the 7-star hotel where he was staying in a suite that cost $15,000 a night, a small group of journalists had already gathered in the lobby. Amanda anticipated his hesitation. Private entrance is already prepared. Security will escort you directly to your suite. She consulted her tablet. We also need to discuss your return flight. It was scheduled for tomorrow night, but considering the circumstances. Change it to the first available flight, Robert interrupted. Staying in Dubai 1 second longer than necessary was unthinkable. Every person in this city now knew him not as the winner of the Entrepreneur of the Year award, but as the idiot who was served divorce papers live on international television. The suite was as opulent as he remembered, with its golden walls, view of the Persian Gulf, marble bathroom larger than most apartments. Larissa had stayed here with him for the past 3 nights. Her clothes were still scattered around the closet, expensive shoes lined up like soldiers. Her perfume permeated the silk sheets. Robert walked to the private bar and poured 3 fingers of 40-year-old bourbon into a crystal glass. The amber liquid burned his throat, but it didn't bring the comfort he sought. It only left a bitter taste that perfectly matched the moment. The room phone rang, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. He hesitated, then answered. Robert. The voice was Christopher's, his 20-year-old son, not Dad, just his first name, spoken with a coldness Robert had never heard before. Mom asked me to call. She's not going to answer your calls, neither is Madison, so it's up to me. Christopher, listen, I can explain. Explain what? The young man's voice was controlled, but Robert detected anger simmering just below the surface. How you bought an apartment for your mistress with money that should pay for my college. How you lied to our mom's face for years. How you turned our entire family into a joke broadcast to the whole world. Robert sank into the velvet armchair. I never wanted you guys to be hurt. But we were. Madison is devastated. She was always Daddy's little princess, remember? Now she finds out the dad she idolized is just another pathetic man who can't keep his pants on. Christopher took a deep breath. And I'm 20, Robert. 20. Do you know how many times you've been present in the last 5 years? 7. I counted. 7 occasions. Birthdays, graduation, when I broke my leg playing lacrosse and needed surgery. 7 times in 5 years. But you had plenty of time for the Maldives with your girlfriend. Every word was a sharp blade, cutting deeper than any legal document could. Mom said for you not to try to come back to the Phoenix house. She changed the locks. Your things will be packed and sent wherever you want. She also said that any communication must go through the lawyers. Christopher paused. Goodbye, Robert. The line went dead before he could respond. Robert sat there, phone still pressed to his ear, watching the desert sun begin to set over the waters of the Gulf. The early morning in Dubai brought with it a heavy silence that even the suite's air conditioning couldn't dissipate. Robert hadn't slept. He spent the hours watching the city lights gradually dim, replaced by the soft orange of dawn over the desert. The bourbon remained half full in the crystal glass, now lukewarm and unappealing. His hands still clutched the divorce papers, now crumpled from the countless times he had read them overnight. The borrowed phone vibrated for the first time since Christopher had hung up. Amanda, always punctual, always efficient. Mr. Davenport, I secured a first-class seat on the 10 a.m. flight. It departs in 5 hours. The hotel staff is preparing your discreet checkout through the private exit. I suggest you get ready to leave in 90 minutes. Robert mumbled something that could pass for thanks and hung up. In the Italian marble bathroom, he faced his reflection for the first time since being on stage. The man staring back at him seemed to have aged a decade in 12 hours. Deep dark circles ringed his brown eyes, now red and swollen. His graying hair, which he had always kept perfectly coiffed, was disheveled and greasy. The stubble made his face look rough, almost unrecognizable. The shower offered little comfort, The hot water cascaded over his tense shoulders, but it couldn't wash away the feeling of exposure, of vulnerability that now defined him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Caroline on the giant screen, her unwavering composure, her measured words. There was no hysteria, no drama, just the truth presented so clinically that it hurt more than any shouted accusation could. As he got dressed, choosing a discreet gray suit instead of his usual bold combinations, his thoughts returned to Madison. His daughter had always been his little princess, as Christopher had bitterly mentioned. She was 23 now, working at an art gallery in Boston, pursuing her passion for curation, something he had never quite understood. How many of her exhibitions had he missed? How many calls had he not returned because he was busy in meetings that, he now realized, could perfectly well have waited? The last time they had spoken properly was last Christmas. Madison flew to Phoenix with a new boyfriend, a literature professor Robert had deemed unsuitable in 30 seconds flat. During dinner, he had spent most of his time on the phone, dealing with a last-minute crisis at one of the casinos. When he finally put his phone away, Madison and her boyfriend had already retreated to the guest room. Caroline was in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes, her face a mask of forced politeness. A discreet knock on the suite door interrupted his thoughts. Amanda entered with 2 hotel security guards, all wearing the same professional, neutral expression. "Your bags are ready, Mr. Davenport. The vehicle is waiting in the underground garage. There are no journalists on that level, but I suggest sunglasses and a baseball cap." The idea of hiding like a fugitive criminal stirred something rebellious within him, but Robert accepted the accessories without protest. What alternative did he have? Facing the cameras with his head held high, pretending his life hadn't publicly imploded. The drive to the airport was a blur of expressways and skyscrapers. The driver kept the radio off, sparing Robert from inevitably hearing his own name on the news. At Dubai International Airport, Amanda had arranged VIP lounge access through an exclusive entrance that completely bypassed the main terminal. Inside the quiet lounge, executives worked on laptops. Some conversed in low tones on the phone. Several curious glances turned his way as he entered, recognition lighting up their faces before they quickly averted their eyes. The gossip had spread through international corporate networks like wildfire through dry straw. Robert found an isolated corner near the panoramic windows that offered a view of the runways. Planes from all major airlines taxied in a choreographed dance, carrying people to destinations where their lives continued normally, without live-stream drama. His personal phone, which Amanda had retrieved from the hotel and silenced, showed 347 missed calls. Text messages told a similar story. Some were from reporters, others from corporate acquaintances, likely seeking insider information or just wanting to show superficial support. There were also messages from Marcus Chen and Dmitry Volkov, both disguising business interest under words of solidarity. One message stood out from the rest. Larissa had sent it at 4 in the morning. "We need to talk. This affects us too. Is that apartment in my name now? What about the jewelry? Call me." No word of support, no concern for his emotional state, just direct, pragmatic financial interest. Robert deleted the message without replying. For the first time, he saw Larissa with absolute clarity. She wasn't a partner, not someone who genuinely loved him. She was simply someone who had recognized an opportunity and seized it with both hands. The boarding call echoed through the lounge's sound system. Amanda appeared at his side like an efficient specter. "Your seat is 2A. Priority boarding has already been authorized. The flight to Los Angeles is 16 hours long. From there, I've arranged a direct connection to Phoenix, unless you prefer another city." Phoenix, the home that was no longer his home, the family who didn't want to see him, but his main offices were there, his lawyers, his accountants. He would have to face the situation eventually. Procrastinating would only make everything harder. "Phoenix is fine," he confirmed, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. The boarding gate seemed to stretch on infinitely. The flight attendant at the aircraft entrance recognized him immediately, her eyes widening briefly before she regained her professional composure. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Davenport. Your seat is to the left. May I offer you champagne before takeoff?" He refused with a nod of his head and sank into the leather seat that reclined fully. First class offered privacy with dividers between seats, small individual cabins that could be closed. He was grateful for this small mercy, closing the sliding door as soon as he settled in. As the aircraft taxied, Robert watched Dubai gradually disappear through the oval window. The city that should have been the setting for his greatest triumph now represented his greatest humiliation. Every skyscraper, every luxurious hotel they passed was a reminder of the empire he had built at the expense of everything else that mattered. The flight took off smoothly, rising over the golden desert that surrounded the artificial metropolis. Robert closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come. Instead, unsolicited memories began to play in his mind like a slow-motion film. Caroline, at 22, blonde hair fluttering in the wind at a rooftop party of some mutual friend at Stanford. She was studying business administration. He was studying civil engineering. They talked all night about dreams, ambitions, places they wanted to see. He promised he would build hotels all over the world, and she said she'd love to see them, but only if they had a house to call home. The wedding was simple, a ceremony in a small chapel in Napa Valley. Her parents discreetly disapproved, finding Robert too ambitious, too unstable. His own parents had died years earlier in a car accident. It was just the two of them against the world, building something from nothing. Madison was born 3 years later, a small girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's determination. Christopher arrived 2 years after that, a calm baby who grew into an introspective and observant boy. Robert remembered holding them as newborns, feeling the tiny weight of their lives in his arms, silently promising he would give them everything. But somewhere along the way, everything became synonymous with money and status, not time and presence. Business trips multiplied. Weekends at the office became routine. And then came the women. Claire first, a corporate lawyer he met during a negotiation in Chicago. It was just one night, he told himself. A mistake that wouldn't be repeated. Except it did repeat. Melissa in New York. Amanda in San Francisco. Each affair was justified with some distorted logic. He worked hard. He deserved moments of pleasure. Caroline didn't understand him anymore. She was always busy with the kids. The excuses multiplied as quickly as the betrayals. Larissa was different only in duration, not in nature. 3 years of a parallel relationship he maintained with the precision of an engineering project. Secret apartment, separate credit cards, lies so elaborate, he sometimes forgot which version of the truth he'd told to whom. The pilot's voice announced they had reached cruising altitude. Robert accepted mineral water from the flight attendant and forced himself to drink, despite his churning stomach. 16 hours to Los Angeles, then 2 more to Phoenix. 18 hours to figure out how to face the consequences of 26 years of selfish choices. His phone vibrated with a notification. Against his better judgment, he unlocked the screen. A Google Alerts notification with his name showed headlines from news outlets around the world. Businessman of the Year served live divorce. Betrayed wife humiliates magnate at ceremony. Caroline Davenport, revenge served cold. There were even financial analyses speculating about the impact the divorce would have on his businesses, his company's shares already starting to fluctuate. Robert turned his phone completely off and leaned back, watching the clouds through the window. Somewhere down there, people were living simple, faithful, honest lives. He had built skyscrapers, but he had never learned how to build solid foundations where it truly mattered. The landing in Los Angeles brought a reality Robert was not prepared to face. As he exited the boarding tunnel, a small crowd of journalists had formed near the gate, cameras and microphones raised like spears. Amanda appeared out of nowhere, intercepting him before he could be surrounded. "Side exit now," she whispered urgently, guiding him through a door marked only with authorized. They hurried through service corridors that smelled of cleaning products and aviation fuel, passing airport staff who watched them with undisguised curiosity. They finally emerged into a reserved parking area where a black SUV with tinted windows was waiting. During the connecting flight to Phoenix, Robert forced himself to think pragmatically. Caroline was asking for 70% of the assets. This meant valuing every property, every investment, every account. The hotels in Las Vegas alone were worth $180 million. The casinos, another $200 million. The restaurant chain, $60 million. There were also residential properties, stocks, investment funds. The empire he had built over decades would be dissected, divided, distributed. Gregory Morrison, the lawyer Caroline had chosen, had a ruthless reputation. Robert knew the name from previous cases that had been extensively reported. Morrison didn't just win. He destroyed opponents in court with surgical precision. If Caroline had hired him, she wasn't bluffing about the 70%. When they finally landed in Phoenix, the Arizona sun was setting in orange and purple hues over the distant mountains. The city he had called home for over 2 decades now seemed strange, almost hostile. Amanda had booked a suite at the Phoenician Resort, a 5-star hotel that ironically had been one of his properties until he sold it 5 years ago for a considerable profit. The suite was spacious and impersonal, decorated in neutral tones of beige and gray. Robert dismissed Amanda with instructions to arrange a meeting with his own lawyers the following morning. When he was finally alone, the silence was deafening. No Caroline making tea in the kitchen, no sound of the television she always left on low, no familiar presence he had taken for granted for so long. His house, the actual home in Paradise Valley, was just 20 minutes away. An 8,000 square meter property with an infinity pool, a tennis court, landscaped gardens that Caroline had meticulously tended over the years. Every corner of that house held memories he now saw through a different filter. The kitchen where Caroline spent hours preparing dinners for events he often missed. The home office where he worked on weekends, while Madison and Christopher played outside, their laughter distant and ignored. For the first time in 48 hours, Robert allowed himself to cry. They weren't dramatic tears or uncontrollable sobs, just a silent flow that traced warm paths down his tired face. He cried for Caroline, who deserved so much more than he had ever given. He cried for Madison and Christopher, whose respect he had perhaps irreversibly lost. He cried for the man he could have been if he had made different choices at crucial moments. The hotel phone rang at 7 in the morning. The reception informed him that his lawyers had arrived and were waiting in the hotel's private conference room. Robert forced himself to shower, shave, and put on a suit that projected some semblance of control. The man in the mirror still looked defeated, but at least presentable. In the conference room, 3 lawyers waited with open laptops and stacks of documents. Richard Brennan, his corporate lawyer for 15 years, was a tall man in his 60s with completely white hair and a perpetually serious expression. Beside him was Jennifer Costa, a family law specialist, a woman in her 40s known for aggressive strategies in divorce battles. The third was a young associate Robert didn't recognize, likely there to take notes and conduct research. "Robert," Richard began without preamble, "the situation is complicated. Gregory Morrison has already officially filed the papers. Caroline's petition is comprehensive and well documented. She has evidence of multiple extramarital affairs, substantial spending on mistresses using marital funds, and can argue that she contributed significantly to the building of your assets." Jennifer opened a thick folder. "Arizona law favors equitable division of marital property, but considering the evidence of infidelity and misuse of funds, 70% is not just possible, it's probable. We could try to negotiate it down, maybe 60%. But you'd need to be willing to endure a long and public trial." "More public than it already is," Robert muttered bitterly. "Considerably," Jennifer replied without emotion. "What happened in Dubai was humiliating, no doubt. But an extended divorce trial would mean months of intimate details being exposed in public court documents. Every transaction, every text message, every encounter would be catalogued and analyzed. The press would have a field day." Richard rested his elbows on the table. "We also need to consider the business impact. Your company's stock has already dropped 12% since yesterday. Investors are nervous. Some corporate partners are asking for reassurances. A prolonged and contentious divorce would only exacerbate the instability. Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of each word. So you're suggesting I just accept the 70%? We're suggesting you seriously consider a quick and discreet settlement, Jennifer corrected. If you agree to her terms without contestation, the process can be finalized in 90 days. You maintain some dignity, she gets what she's asking for, and you both move on. Move on, Robert repeated, the irony not lost on him. How did someone simply move on after losing 70% of everything he had built, plus his family, reputation, and self-respect? They spent the next 3 hours reviewing detailed financial spreadsheets, calculating different scenarios. Each number represented years of work, negotiations, calculated risks. Seeing everything reduced to percentages and monetary values was simultaneously clinical and devastating. When the lawyers finally left, promising to draft a response by the end of the day, Robert was alone again in the empty conference room. Through the panoramic windows, he watched Phoenix stretch out in all directions, a desert metropolis he had helped shape with his construction projects. 3 of the major hotels visible from there were his. But what did it all mean if he had no one to share it with? His personal phone, which he had turned back on that morning, showed a new message from Madison. His heart quickened as he opened it, hoping perhaps for a less harsh word than his conversation with Christopher. But it was just one line. Mom wants you to know your personal belongings are being organized. A moving truck will come to where you're staying tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Not even signed with her name. Just a cold, transactional message about his belongings being removed from the house he had paid for, but that had never truly felt like his own. All the clothes Carolyn had bought for him over the years, the gifts the children had given him for birthdays and Christmases, family photographs that now seemed like framed lies. Robert replied with a simple, "Thank you," and the hotel address. There was nothing more to say. Madison clearly didn't want conversation, just efficiency. The afternoon dragged on interminably. Robert tried to work, replying to urgent emails from property managers and corporate directors, all delicately avoiding mentioning the elephant in the room. His responses were mechanical, his mind only partially focused on matters of budgets and renovation timelines. At 5 in the afternoon, Amanda called with news that somehow managed to worsen an already terrible day. Mr. Davenport, Larissa gave an interview to People magazine. It's going to be published tomorrow. She claims you promised to leave your wife, that the apartment was a gift, and that she's as much a victim in this situation as Caroline. Robert felt bile rise in his throat. She said that, after I paid every one of her bills for 3 years? There's more, Amanda hesitated. She's also considering suing for emotional distress. She says her reputation has been ruined by the public exposure. It was almost comical. Larissa, who had consciously entered a relationship with a married man, was now positioning herself as a victim. Robert imagined Caroline reading that interview, perhaps even laughing at the sheer audacity, or perhaps just filing it away as more evidence of his lack of judgment. Ignore it, he instructed Amanda. Don't reply, don't comment. Let Morrison handle it if she actually sues. As night fell over Phoenix, Robert found himself on the suite's balcony, watching the city lights gradually turn on like terrestrial stars. Somewhere out there, Caroline was in their house, probably feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Madison was in Boston, trying to process the implosion of the family she had known. Christopher, attending Stanford, was carrying anger that might never be fully resolved. And he was here, in a hotel he once owned, now just another paying guest. A man who had built skyscrapers, but had let his own foundation crumble through pure negligence and arrogance. The businessman of the year who had lost everything that truly mattered in the pursuit of superficial validation and momentary pleasures. The night desert wind carried a chill that cut to the bone. Robert closed his eyes and wondered if redemption was possible for someone who had caused so much damage. If 70% of his assets was a fair price for 26 years of lies, if his children would ever look at him again without transparent disappointment in their eyes. There were no easy answers. Just the long night stretching ahead and the certainty that tomorrow would bring more consequences of choices that could not be undone. The morning brought the moving truck promptly at 3 in the afternoon, as Madison had promised. Robert watched from the suite window as 2 uniformed men unloaded brown cardboard boxes, all meticulously labeled in Caroline's characteristically neat cursive handwriting. Clothes, winter, personal documents, photographs, miscellaneous. Each label written by Caroline's hand, probably as she systematically packed away 26 years of his presence in that house. There were 18 boxes in total. 26 years reduced to 18 cardboard boxes that fit comfortably in the corner of the suite's living room. Robert signed the delivery papers without looking into the eyes of the movers, who clearly recognized him but maintained enough professionalism not to comment. When he was finally alone with the boxes, he stood still for long minutes, unable to decide which one to open first. The choice seemed to carry symbolic weight that he wasn't prepared to process. Eventually, he chose the one marked photographs and cut the tape with his room key. Inside, family albums were organized chronologically. The first showed their wedding in Napa Valley, Caroline radiant in a simple lace dress, he young and full of ambition, visible even in static photographs. There was a specific image he didn't remember seeing before. Caroline looking at him during their vows, an expression of absolute trust illuminating her face. She had truly believed in him at that moment, believed in every promise he had made. The following albums documented the arrival of Madison, then Christopher, first steps, first days of school, dance recitals, soccer games. Robert appeared sporadically in these photographs, always with a slightly distracted expression, as if his mind was already on the next meeting, the next project, the next professional achievement. In contrast, Caroline was present in almost every image, genuinely smiling, eyes focused completely on the children. A specific photograph stopped him. Christmas 7 years ago. Everyone gathered around the tree in the living room. Madison was 16, Christopher 14. Caroline wore a red sweater he vaguely remembered buying for her at an airport during some trip. The children held presents, but everyone was looking at a point outside the frame, probably him taking the photo. Except he didn't remember that moment at all. He didn't remember that specific Christmas, that specific sweater, those specific expressions of family happiness. How many other moments had he missed while being physically present but emotionally absent? How many important conversations, teenage confessions, nighttime fears, and daytime dreams went unnoticed because his attention was perpetually divided? His phone vibrated with a message from Richard Brennan. Morrison responded to our initial proposal. He's unyielding on the 70%, but offers an accelerated timeline if you agree without contention. Can we discuss tomorrow at 9? Robert typed an affirmative response and put his phone away. 70%. The number had lost some of its impact through constant repetition. It had become just another fact in a reality he was still slowly processing. The box marked personal documents revealed passports, birth certificates, university diplomas. There was also a leather folder he didn't immediately recognize. Inside, Caroline had organized all the letters he had written to her during the first years of their relationship. There must have been 30 or 40, handwritten on hotel stationery from hotels where he stayed during early business trips. Robert unfolded one randomly, dated March 1998. My dearest Caroline, this hotel in Seattle is luxurious but lonely without you. I closed a deal today that will change everything for us. In 5 years, I promise you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. A big house, financial security, the freedom to pursue your own passions while I build our future. I love you more with each passing day. Your Robert. The words were sincere when written. He truly believed those promises. But somewhere between 1998 and now, everything you've ever dreamed of had transformed into empty mansions and abundant bank accounts, while he had forgotten to ask if that's what Caroline truly wanted. Perhaps she just wanted family dinners without his phone ringing incessantly. Perhaps she wanted real conversations about fears and hopes instead of superficial updates on corporate negotiations. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Amanda entered carrying a tablet and a cautiously neutral expression that he had learned to interpret as a harbinger of bad news. Larissa's interview was published online earlier than expected. It's generating considerable attention on social media. She hesitated before continuing. Caroline responded via her personal Twitter account. Just one line, but it's going viral. Robert took the offered tablet. Caroline's account, which he hadn't even known existed, showed a single tweet posted 2 hours ago. When you forgive 3 extramarital affairs, but the 4th includes a Manhattan apartment bought with money meant for your children's college, forgiveness stops being a virtue and becomes complicity. It had 48,000 retweets and 200,000 likes. The comments were predominantly supportive of Caroline, women sharing their own stories of betrayal, men condemning his behavior. Larissa was being lambasted in the replies, called an opportunist, a gold digger, a homewrecker. Not that Robert felt any particular sympathy for her at that moment, but the speed and ferocity with which the internet had turned against both of them was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. Morrison is using this strategically, Amanda observed, controlling the public narrative while negotiating behind the scenes. It's a smart move. Robert handed back the tablet. Caroline was always smart. I just never paid enough attention to realize how smart. When Amanda left, he returned to the boxes, now opening the one marked miscellaneous. Inside, he found random objects Caroline had apparently deemed important enough to preserve. The watch Madison had given him for his 16th birthday, still working despite him never wearing it. A mug with World's Best Dad that Christopher had made in 3rd grade ceramics class, the handle slightly crooked. A hotel-shaped keychain Caroline had bought as a joke on their first wedding anniversary. Each object carried history, context, meaning that he had neglected at the time, but now seemed too precious to measure. The crooked mug represented an afternoon Christopher had excitedly spent creating something for him, probably while Robert was in some forgettable meeting. The watch represented Madison spending her allowance on something she thought he would appreciate, not realizing that he only measured value in expensive brands and status. His phone rang, unknown number, but this time he answered, tired of avoiding the inevitable. Mr. Davenport, this is Detective Sarah Chen from the Phoenix Police Department. I need to discuss an issue related to Ms. Larissa Montero. She filed a complaint alleging harassment and threats. She said that you repeatedly contacted her demanding the return of gifts. Is this true? Robert sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. I absolutely did not contact her. I deleted her last message without replying. I have no interest in communicating with her. Can phone records confirm this? The detective sounded skeptical but professional. Absolutely. My assistant, Amanda Reeves, has access to my records. I can provide them immediately. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Davenport, I'm going to be direct. This situation is receiving considerable attention. Any allegation, true or not, will be intensely scrutinized. I suggest you document all communication, avoid any contact with Ms. Montero, and consult your attorney before making public statements. When the call ended, Robert found himself laughing without humor. Larissa was now fabricating allegations, probably seeking a financial settlement or simply trying to deflect negative attention. The apartment he had bought, the jewelry he had gifted, the 3 years of paid bills apparently meant nothing compared to the opportunity to publicly victimize herself. The irony was not lost on him. He had taken Caroline for granted for decades, assuming she would always be there, always forgive, always maintain the facade of a perfect family. Meanwhile, he had invested time, money, and emotional energy in women like Larissa, who disappeared at the first sign of real trouble. The sun was beginning to set through the panoramic windows, casting long shadows across the scattered boxes. Robert picked up the wedding album again, studying the photograph of Caroline looking at him with absolute trust. That woman no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, someone who had decided that 26 years of unilateral commitment were enough. He had tried calling her 17 times since Dubai. All calls went straight to voicemail. He had tried sending messages to Madison and Christopher, but both had left him on read without responding. He was being systematically cut off from the family he had taken for granted, and there were no convincing arguments he could offer in his defense. The simple, devastating truth was that Caroline was right in every accusation. He had spent family money on mistresses. He had missed important events of his children by choice, not necessity. He had built a professional empire while allowing personal relationships to crumble through active neglect. 70% of the assets seemed an extraordinarily low price for 26 years of dedication that he had never adequately reciprocated. In fact, Caroline was being generous by allowing him to keep anything beyond emotional baggage and regret. Robert carefully closed the album and placed it back in the box. Outside, Phoenix began to switch on its nightlights, millions of people living lives that continued normally while his remained suspended in a limbo of his own creation. Tomorrow he would meet the lawyers and agree to Caroline's terms. Not because 70% was legally fair, but because it was morally fair. It was the least she deserved for decades of patience he had mistaken for weakness. And then he would have to figure out how to live with the consequences of choices that couldn't be undone. And perhaps, eventually, how to become the man he had promised to be in those old handwritten letters on distant hotel stationery. A man that young Caroline had believed he could be, before ambition and arrogance transformed him into someone unrecognizable even to himself. The meeting the following morning took place in an office on the 18th floor of a corporate building in downtown Phoenix, with panoramic views of the mountains surrounding the valley. Richard Brennan had reserved a neutral conference room, territory that belonged neither to Robert nor to Caroline's lawyers. An impartial space where 26 years of marriage would be reduced to legal clauses and signatures on official documents. Robert arrived 15 minutes early, a professional habit that persisted even when his personal life was in complete ruins. Amanda accompanied him, carrying a leather briefcase with copies of all relevant documents. Jennifer Costa was already there, reviewing papers with a concentrated expression that revealed neither optimism nor pessimism. Just the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to navigating family collapses as a professional routine. Gregory Morrison arrived exactly at 9, punctual in a way that suggested absolute control over every aspect of his life. He was a man in his 50s, perfectly coiffed gray hair, a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His eyes were gray and analytical, observing Robert with clinical assessment as they shook hands with a professional firmness that carried no warmth. "Mr. Davenport," Morrison greeted, his voice grave and measured. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. My client is interested in resolving this matter expeditiously and with minimal additional exposure for both parties." Robert nodded, unable to formulate a response that didn't sound defeated or defensive. Everyone settled around the polished mahogany table, assistants and associates taking strategic positions like pieces on a legal chessboard. Morrison opened a folder identical to the one Jennifer held, synchronized movements that suggested everything had already been choreographed in advance. "Let's get straight to the terms. My client is requesting 70% of all marital assets acquired during the marriage. This includes, but is not limited to, commercial properties, residential properties, bank accounts, investments, company shares, and retirement funds." He slid a spreadsheet across the table, numbers organized in meticulous columns, each row representing a piece of the life Robert had built. The 3 hotels in Las Vegas, valued at $180 million. The 2 casinos, $200 million. The restaurant chain, $60 million. Residential properties in Phoenix, San Diego, and Aspen, combined $45 million. Bank accounts and various investments, another $70 million. Total, $555 million. 70% of that was $388 million. Robert would be left with $167 million, an amount that would still keep him extremely wealthy by anyone's standards. But it wasn't the numbers that hurt. It was the meaning behind them. Each property listed represented years of work, negotiations, calculated risks, and now it would be divided like spoils of war in a battle he had lost before it even began. There's also the matter of the primary residence in Paradise Valley, Morrison continued, his voice maintaining the same neutral tone he probably used to discuss the weather. My client wishes to keep the property. It's valued at $8 million. That amount will be deducted from your percentage, naturally. Jennifer made quick notes on her tablet. And what about the custody of the operational properties? My client has managed these businesses for decades. Dividing shares could complicate operations. Ms. Davenport has no interest in involving herself in day-to-day operations, Morrison replied. She is willing to maintain a silent stake in the companies, receiving proportional dividends but leaving managerial decisions to your client. This is specified in Clause 17 of the proposed agreement. Robert flipped through the pages until he found the mentioned clause. Caroline didn't want control of his hotels or casinos. She wasn't trying to destroy the empire he had built. She merely wanted her fair share and the freedom to move on without his constant presence. It was pragmatic in a way he would have admired in a business context, but which now seemed simply sad in a personal context. And what about the publicly discussed items? Jennifer asked, obviously referring to Larissa and the Manhattan apartment. The apartment bought for the third party. Morrison allowed himself a small, humorless smile. The apartment was acquired using marital funds without my client's knowledge or consent. She is requesting that it be sold immediately and the profits divided according to the agreed percentage, 70-30. As for the mentioned third party, my client has no interest in pursuing legal action against her. She considers that an unnecessary distraction. Robert felt a wave of something akin to gratitude. Caroline could easily have sued Larissa, dragging the situation further into public mud. That she had chosen not to do so suggested that despite everything she still maintained some dignity and a desire to conclude this with as little additional drama as possible. There are also specific clauses regarding communication with the children. Morrison turned several pages. Christopher and Madison are adults and make their own choices. However, my client requests that your client not use financial matters as leverage in his relationship with the children. Any financial support for education or other needs must be coordinated through her to prevent manipulation. The implication was clear and cutting. Caroline didn't trust that he wouldn't try to buy the children's affection after losing them in other ways. The silent accusation hurt precisely because it had basis. How many times over the years had he compensated for absence with expensive gifts? How many missed birthdays had been smoothed over with generous checks? My client agrees to the terms, Jennifer stated after briefly conferring with Richard. We understand that a swift resolution benefits both parties. We are prepared to sign today if the final documents can be prepared. Morrison nodded to his associate, who opened a laptop and began typing modifications in real time. I can have the finalized documents by 3 in the afternoon. Can we reconvene here at 4 for signatures? Everyone agreed with bureaucratic efficiency that made the moment surreally transactional. 26 years of marriage would be legally dissolved between business meetings, as if it were just another corporate contract being terminated. As Morrison and his team stood to leave, he paused next to Robert. For your information, my client is not doing this out of revenge. She made that very clear from our first meeting. She's doing it because she deserves to start over with resources she helped build. I thought you'd want to know. Robert looked up, meeting Morrison's gray eyes. I know, he replied quietly. She was always a better person than I deserved. Morrison nodded once. Something akin to respect briefly crossing his professional expression, then left with his team, leaving Robert alone with his own lawyers. Jennifer closed her tablet. You made the right choice. Fighting this in court would cost millions in legal fees and years of your life, and you'd probably lose even more in the end. I'm not doing it because it's strategically smart, Robert replied, surprised by the clarity in his own voice. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances that Robert couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps surprise, perhaps relief, that they wouldn't have to fight an impossible battle defending the indefensible. When he was finally alone in the conference room, Robert walked over to the panoramic windows. Phoenix stretched out below, a city he knew intimately, but which now seemed strange and distant. His entire life was being reconfigured, Structures he had assumed were permanent, revealing themselves to be temporary when built on foundations of neglect and betrayal. At 4 p.m, when everyone reconvened, the final documents were printed on heavy, official paper, 37 pages detailing the dissolution of 26 years. Robert read each page slowly, not looking for loopholes or hidden clauses, but simply processing the reality of it all. His signature at the bottom of the document seemed to take an eternity. The pen felt heavy in his hand, dark blue ink forming his name in cursive he'd practiced for decades on multi-million-dollar contracts. But never had a signature meant so much or cost so dearly. Caroline signed her copy in Morrison's office across town. Morrison confirmed via text message. Both now legally committed to the end she had orchestrated with precision that would have impressed any corporate strategist. "The legal waiting period in Arizona is 60 days, Morrison explained as he organized the signed copies. "After that period, the divorce will be finalized automatically unless either party requests modifications. Given that you both agreed to terms, I don't anticipate complications." 60 days. 2 months until everything was officially over. Robert found that part of him had hoped to feel relief or liberation. Instead, there was only persistent emptiness and a growing awareness of all he had lost due to choices that now seemed incomprehensibly stupid. As he left the building, the Phoenix sun was at its highest point, the desert heat wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. Amanda waited in the car, air conditioning running, ready to drive him back to the hotel he temporarily called home. "There are messages from the property managers in Las Vegas," she informed him as they navigated the afternoon traffic. "And the board of directors is requesting a meeting to discuss transition and corporate restructuring. There's also an interview request from Forbes about the divorce's impact on business." Robert closed his eyes, head resting against the leather headrest. The world kept spinning, business demanded attention, responsibilities persisted regardless of personal turmoil. But for the first time in decades, he couldn't muster the energy to care about board meetings or magazine interviews. "Cancel everything for the next 3 days, he instructed. "Say I'm dealing with personal matters and will return to a normal schedule next week." Amanda hesitated, fingers hovering over her tablet. "Are you sure? The board is quite insistent." "I'm sure. They can wait 3 days. If they can't, perhaps I'm not as indispensable as everyone pretends I am." Back in his hotel suite, Robert found himself opening more boxes Caroline had packed. The one marked miscellaneous revealed his collection of ties, all chosen by her over the years. She had a knack for matching colors and patterns that he had never developed. Each tie carried a vague memory of a specific occasion where he'd worn it, Caroline adjusting the knot before important events, her fingers gentle against his collar. There were also cards, dozens of them, stored in a decorative box he'd never seen. Birthdays, Father's Days, Christmases, all signed by Madison and Christopher, in handwriting that evolved from childish scribbles to adult script over the years. Simple yet heartfelt messages. "Happy birthday, Dad. Love you to the moon and back. Best dad in the world. Thanks for everything you do for us." Each card was evidence of love he had received but never adequately returned. The children loved him simply because he was their father, without conditions or expectations beyond a presence he had rarely offered. And he had reciprocated that unconditional love with absences justified by ambition and checks that replaced time they would never get back. The hotel phone rang, interrupting his spiral of regret. He hesitated before answering, half expecting more bad news or legal complications. "Robert." The voice was familiar but unexpected. Marcus Chen, his longtime competitor in the hotel industry. "I heard about the settlement. Quick call, not business. Just wanted to say I'm sorry about the situation." Robert processed this slowly. Marcus and he had competed for contracts and properties for 15 years, maintaining a respectful but distant professional rivalry. "I appreciate that, Marcus. I wasn't expecting your call." "My own wife left me 5 years ago," Marcus confessed, his voice carrying the weight of shared experience. "Same basic reasons. Too much work, too little presence. I learned hard lessons too late. If you need to talk to someone who understands, I'm available. When the call ended, Robert realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. There were other men who had made similar choices, paid similar prices. It didn't make his actions any less wrong, but perhaps it made the path ahead marginally less lonely. The 60-day legal waiting period passed with a cruel slowness that turned each morning into an exercise in endurance. Robert remained at the Phoenician resort for the first week, then rented a modern apartment in Scottsdale, furnished in a minimalist style that drastically contrasted with the opulence he had inhabited for decades. 2,000 square feet that felt vast and empty compared to the 8,000 square meters of the Paradise Valley home that was no longer his. Work offered fragmented distraction. Board meetings took place as scheduled, with executives treating him with cautious normalcy that barely disguised underlying discomfort. His hotels and casinos continued to operate efficiently, proof that the systems he had built were solid enough to survive his personal turmoil. There were meetings with accountants to restructure assets according to the divorce settlement, lawyers finalizing property transfers, financial advisors reconfiguring investment portfolios. Caroline maintained absolute silence throughout the period. All communication went through Morrison or his assistants, cold and efficient transactions that reduced 26 years of shared history to legal memos and bank transfers. The Paradise Valley house was officially transferred to her name in the third week. The Manhattan apartment he had bought for Larissa was sold quickly. Profits divided as agreed. Company shares were redistributed, Caroline taking a silent 70% stake while he maintained operational control. Madison and Christopher remained unresponsive to his attempts at contact. Robert sent messages weekly, carefully composed texts that avoided empty apologies and simply expressed love he should have shown more consistently throughout their lives. None were answered. The messages showed as read evidence that his children saw his words but chose not to engage. Each read receipt without a reply was a small but cumulative rejection that corroded his hope for reconciliation. In the fifth week, Robert did something he hadn't done in years. He canceled all commitments for an entire day and drove to Sedona, 2 hours north of Phoenix. The red rock formations rose against an impossibly blue sky, a landscape Caroline had always loved and that he had promised to visit with her countless times but never prioritized. He hiked trails alone, sweat dripping under the relentless Arizona sun, forcing his 52-year-old body through terrain that challenged him both physically and emotionally. Atop a formation called Cathedral Rock, he sat on a sun-warmed stone and finally allowed himself to fully process the magnitude of all he had lost. Not the hotels or the money. Those were losses he could quantify and eventually rebuild. But Caroline, who had spent half her life by his side and now preferred to communicate through lawyers. Madison, whose last art exhibition he had missed, because he was in a meeting that could have easily been rescheduled. Christopher, whose college lacrosse games he had never watched because business trips always seemed more urgent. His phone vibrated with a message from Amanda. Forbes had published an article analyzing the divorce's impact on his business empire. Stocks had stabilized after an initial dip, investors seemingly convinced that personal turmoil would not compromise corporate operations. The article speculated about a possible sale of some assets to liquidate the divorce settlement, but anonymous sources confirmed that Robert maintained sufficient operational control to continue expanding. He deleted the notification without reading the full article. Forbes could speculate all it wanted about financial balance sheets and corporate strategies. None of it addressed the real question. How had a man who had built an empire from nothing failed so completely to build a sustainable family? During the descent from Cathedral Rock, Robert slipped on loose rock and fell heavily, his knee hitting an uneven surface. Sharp pain radiated through his leg, intense enough to make him pause and breathe deeply until it subsided to a persistent throb. When he finally got up, he continued his descent with renewed caution, each step measured and deliberate. The metaphor was not lost on him. Perhaps rebuilding started with smaller, more mindful steps, rather than ambitious rushes toward the next conquest. In the final week before the divorce was finalized, Robert received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address, but he immediately recognized Caroline's handwriting. Inside, a single photograph and a handwritten note on plain paper. The photo showed all four of them on a trip to San Diego 10 years ago, posing in front of the USS Midway. Christopher was 10, Madison 13. All of them smiled genuinely, frozen in a moment of authentic family happiness. He vaguely remembered that day. He had flown to San Diego to scout a potential property, and Caroline had suggested bringing the kids, turning a business trip into a family weekend. He had been impatient with the aircraft carrier tour, his mind partly focused on the meeting scheduled for Monday. But Christopher had been fascinated by the fighter jets, and Madison had appreciated the historical aspects. Caroline had spent the entire day ensuring everyone was happy, mediating between his impatience and the children's excitement. At the time, he had seen her as an inconvenience managing domestic details. Now he saw the truth. She was the glue holding the family together, while he constantly threatened to fragment it with distractions and distorted priorities. Caroline's letter, though brief, offered something he hadn't expected, an acknowledgement that not everything had been bad. That among the betrayals and neglects, there had been authentic moments of family connection. It didn't excuse his failures, but it suggested she didn't view him as entirely irredeemable. It was partial forgiveness, wrapped in a realistic acknowledgement of damage caused. Robert framed the photograph and placed it on the nightstand in his Spartan bedroom. Every night before bed, he looked at those four people frozen in a moment of joy. A reminder of what he had and lost, but also of what he still loved despite no longer deserving that love. On the day the divorce would be officially finalized, Robert woke at 5 in the morning. Not due to insomnia this time, but by deliberate decision. He dressed in running clothes and went out into the silent pre-dawn streets of Scottsdale. He ran 8 kilometers, something he hadn't done regularly in years, his lungs burning and muscles protesting. But he completed the distance, proving to himself that he was still capable of finishing something difficult when he truly committed. At 10 in the morning, he received official confirmation from Morrison. The divorce was finalized, 26 years legally dissolved with the stamp of a judge who had never personally known them. Robert Davenport and Caroline Mitchell were officially no longer married. She had reverted to her maiden name, another symbol of a new beginning, while he remained tied to an identity built during a marriage that no longer existed. That afternoon, he did something that surprised even himself. He called Marcus Chen and accepted a previous dinner invitation. They met at a discreet restaurant in Phoenix, away from places where they might be recognized or photographed. Marcus arrived with a compassionate expression that transcended professional rivalry. "My divorce was finalized exactly 5 years ago today," Marcus shared over glasses of red wine. "I thought it was the end of the world. In some ways, it was. At least the end of the world as I knew it. But I've found that new worlds can be built from the ruins of old ones. It just takes time and real humility." "How much time?" Robert asked, aware that he sounded like a child seeking reassurance. Marcus considered this. "I'm still building, but I'm closer to my children now than I was during the marriage. My ex-wife and I talk civilly about family matters. I learned that professional success doesn't fill the void left by personal failure. Those lessons were worth the pain, though at the time, it didn't feel that way." They talked for 3 hours. Two men who had competed for contracts and properties now connected by shared failures on a more important front. Marcus had mentioned being in therapy, something Robert had never considered but now saw possible utility in. Perhaps understanding the patterns that led him to self-sabotage could prevent repetition in future relationships, if he were ever granted another chance. When Robert finally returned to his empty apartment that night, he found an email from Christopher. Brief, formal, but it was communication. "Mom said the divorce was finalized today. Madison and I need more time before we talk properly. But I want you to know I don't hate you. I'm just disappointed and processing. Maybe eventually we can find our way back to some kind of relationship. But it will be different than it was. Christopher. Robert read the email 7 times, analyzing each word for hidden meaning. Eventually, wasn't a guarantee, but it wasn't a permanent rejection either. Some kind of relationship wasn't a return to the previous status, but it was an opening to a future where connection could exist in a new, redefined form. Christopher wasn't offering easy forgiveness, but he was offering possibility. In that moment, possibility seemed more precious than any corporate contract Robert had ever signed. He replied simply, "Thank you for writing. Take all the time you and Madison need. I'll be here when and if you decide you're ready. I love you both more than I managed to adequately show. Working to become the man who deserves to be in your lives again. Dad." He pressed send before he could rethink every word, then closed his laptop. Outside his apartment window, Phoenix sparkled under a clear night sky, millions of lights representing millions of lives continuing at their own complex rhythms. He was just one person in that vast metropolis, no more important than any other despite the hotels he had built and the money he had accumulated. The framed photograph on his nightstand caught his eye. 4 smiling people on a sunny day in San Diego, preserved in a moment he hadn't fully appreciated when it happened. But he had it now. He had memory, he had regret, and perhaps most importantly, he had an emerging beginning of understanding about what kind of man he needed to become. The empire he had built still stood, though diminished and reconfigured. But the real work of building was just beginning. Not of hotels or casinos, but of character, integrity, and relationships based on genuine presence instead of checks and empty promises. It would be harder work than any corporate negotiation, with no guarantee of success or return on investment. Robert turned off the lights and lay down in a bed that still felt strange and temporary. For the first time in 60 days, he felt something beyond paralyzing regret or persistent anxiety. It wasn't happiness, not even contentment. It was quiet determination. Determination to honor the sacrifice Caroline had made in freeing him, to honor the disappointment his children carried by working to become worthy of eventually reconnecting, to build a life that valued presence over performance, substance over status. The businessman of the year had lost almost everything. But perhaps with time and genuine effort, the man behind that title could find his way back to something more valuable than any golden trophy or public recognition. A way back to himself, and eventually, if he was lucky and worked tirelessly, a way back to the people he loved and who deserved better than he had given them. Sleep came more easily that night than any other since Dubai. Not because problems were solved, but because there was finally clarity about the work ahead. And for the first time in decades, Robert Davenport was ready to do the hard work that truly mattered.